G'day Guardians and friends, welcome back to the channel. I have no idea why I decided to go with such an Aussie intro, but we're gonna roll with it. Are you like me and ever watched a Destiny 2 speedrun video of, let's say, The Whisper in 3 minutes or less, or seen a streamer fly across the gap in King's Fall and thought to yourself, that's cool, but you've got no idea how they do it? Well, hopefully after today's video, even you will be able to start practicing these kind of movement tricks yourself. I've even got a couple of little tips that might help depending on whether you play on controller or on PC. With Heavy Metal finally introducing our first new gear Eager Edge sword since the release of Edge of Fate, I was thinking to myself a refresher guide on Destiny 2's movement tech might actually be beneficial, so here we are. The general plan for today's video is to introduce some of the easier movement techs like Eager Edge skating and rocket jumping. I'm calling them easier to perform because they require very little setup and can be done almost everywhere in the game. And after you practice them, I guarantee you'll find it easy too. I personally use these movement techs a lot when I play the game, especially during jumping puzzles in raids and dungeons. When I first learned how to Eager Edge skate, I sucked. It took me a couple of hours to mentally figure it out, and even then, I was barely getting it right 1 in 10 times. But nowadays, because I practice so much since when I started, and because I've used all of these movement techs so frequently, it's basically second nature now. I will leave a list of the movement techs that I want to cover today in the description as timestamps, so that if you already know something and you want to skip ahead, or you want a refresher on something specific to come back to at a later date, it'll be easier for you to come back to and navigate to wherever you want to go. As always, if you find this video helpful, please leave a like on it to let me know. And if you have your own way of doing these movement techs, please leave a comment down below, because my explanation might not make sense to someone else, but your own version just might be what someone else needs for it to click for them. So anyway, let's get into it. I want to start with rocket jumping. Since a couple of seasons ago, rocket jumping has actually become a widely accessible and easy to utilize skill in Destiny 2. There are some tricks to make it more useful, which I will explain. To begin with, rocket jumping, if you're not familiar, is basically a term originating from Halo, where players could use a rocket launcher to give their jumps extra height. Fast forward to the Into the Light update, and Bungie changes how breech-loaded grenade launchers function in Destiny 2. Now when you fire these at your feet, you no longer deal an insane amount of self-damage. Instead, these grenade launcher shots give you momentum and push you around. Because of this, players immediately started working out how to rocket jump in Destiny 2. Basically, you shoot the grenade launcher at the ground a moment after you jump, and the momentum from the grenade launcher plus your jump will send you much higher. Now on Warlocks and Titans, if you activate your glide a moment after shooting the grenade launcher, it gives your glide or thruster even more height than before. So to be as clear as possible, jump, shoot, glide. All within the space of like half a second. You need to press the buttons in rapid succession, and on controller, this is exactly the same. I found it to be much easier to learn on a controller personally, because when using a controller, all the button inputs can be done by one hand compared to PC, where my left and right hand had to be in sync. But with practice, it will be just as easy regardless of what you play on. If you're using the default controller settings, on PlayStation, it would be X, R2, X, and if you're using Xbox controller, it would be A, RT, A. Now, this ordering is only for Warlocks and Titans, because if you use the same timing on Hunters, you will just cut all of your momentum instantly and you will go nowhere fast. By activating your second jump, all of your momentum gets removed. So to take advantage of rocket jumping on Hunters, your initial jump is the most important. Since you don't have a glide or thruster to carry you even further after the initial boost, you need to make sure that your initial jump and follow-up grenade launcher shot are basically simultaneous. The less time between your jump and your grenade launcher will result in you being launched higher. This is also good practice for Warlocks and Titans too, because it will benefit their own rocket jump as well. Now, why bother learning this? Well, it's great for jumping puzzles. You can get extra height on Hunters, which can sometimes be a big point of frustration for some people, and you can use it to jump further on Warlocks and Titans. And in most cases, it takes special ammo instead of, say, heavy ammo. With Episode Revenant came an exotic primary breech-loaded grenade launcher, which functions exactly the same as the OG Mountaintop. This means that no matter the scenario, if you ever need extra height, you will always have access to a weapon that can give you a boost. Well, except when lock loadouts is on. Moving on, let's talk about Eager Edge. If you've been grinding heavy metal for the new weapons, you might have managed to get your hands on the new Waveframe sword with Eager Edge. But, and I really hate to break it to you, this sword is not very good for Eager Edge skating. The reason actually has to do with how the heavy attack works. See, unlike the previous Eager Edge swords that we've had access to, Sinner Shear is, as I said, a waveframe sword, so the heavy attack launches you upwards instead of forwards. It doesn't actually get much forward momentum with the heavy attack, which really sucks. It means that this sword isn't a very good option for Eager Edge skating. That doesn't stop it from being useful as a generic Eager Edge sword though. So before I explain how to skate, let me explain Eager Edge just a little bit. The way this perk effectively works is when you draw the sword, you have an increased lunge distance for a couple of seconds. The perk will only work for a single sword swing though, and then it deactivates. Now, a trick some people don't know is that while in the air, by swapping off your sword mid-sword swing, you actually travel further since you keep your momentum from the Eager Edge sword swing. If you keep your sword out for the entire animation, the momentum gained from Eager Edge is lost at the end of the animation. You can use this knowledge if you need to short stop, but most of the time you will probably want to maintain the momentum, so this is definitely something worth practicing. Now let's chat about skating. This is likely what you've seen before, and it involves multiple inputs in quick succession with certain abilities, that when done correctly gives you an insane amount of speed. For the sake of keeping this a beginner's guide, Titans, I'm sorry to say, but you don't have an easy way to skate repeatedly. You do have a sword flying option, however, but I'll explain that in a minute. Depending on your controller mapping, it might be easier to learn skating by using Hunter instead of a Warlock. With practice, you won't notice or see any difference, but explaining the concept and practicing it yourself might be easier starting out on a Hunter. So let me explain Hunters first. The Destiny community calls this shatter skating. It requires you to be on stasis Hunter with the aspect shatter dive, hence the name. To shatter skate on Hunter, go up to a ledge and do the following in order. Perform heavy attack, then jump, and finally shatter dive. But I don't mean slowly. Just like with rocket jumping, you need to perform these almost simultaneously. The button inputs need to be so fast, it just feels like they're being pressed at the same time. If I was to number each action 1, 2, and 3, you need to press them like this. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. If you're using a controller with the default button mapping, the trick that I used to learn shatter skating at first is to heavy attack, and then when I pressed the jump button, I would slide my thumb from the jump button up to the shatter dive button. On PlayStation, this is going to be from X to circle, and on Xbox, that is going to be A to B. By sliding my thumb across the controller from one button to the other without raising it, it helped reduce the mental overhead of the button inputs until I got better at it. All I had to think about was heavy attack and slide. Heavy attack and slide. On PC, unfortunately for you, I don't really have any good tips for you, sorry. You will just have to practice until it makes sense, unless someone in the comments can give you some tips. Or, I don't know, you run a macro. The timing on Warlock is exactly the same, only the setup and button mappings are different. As the name implies, you need to be on Solar Warlock with Well of Radiance, and to actually perform the skate, you need to have a fully charged super. Unlike Hunters, if you make a mistake and activate your well, you will need to wait for your whole super to come back. The advantage to using well skating over shatter skating is that you can combine it with aspects like heat rises and Icarus Dash to take you even further. But I'm not going to explain that, just practice the basic form of skating first and get flashy when you've had some practice. As I said, the timing on Warlock skating is exactly the same as shatter skating on Hunter. It's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. But this time on controller, if you're using the default button mapping, there is no trick. You will have to practice just being quick, which is why I suggest practicing hunters first, so you learn how fast you actually need to be. On PC, if you've learned how to skate on hunters first, the hardest part of learning warlocks will be not activating your class ability instead of your super, which I won't lie to you, I have done way too often and still do. As you get more comfortable with the movement tech, and you get a bit of skating usage into regular gameplay, you'll start to figure out what kind of spots will actually allow you to skate off of and what ledges won't. It will become second nature if you skate enough, but for the time being, regardless of whether you're using Hunter or Warlock, just look for sheer cliffs that drop off that you can line up on. Start stationary, and once you've got the hang of things, then start running up to the edges. Moving on to Titans. Since you don't actually have any abilities that let you skate repeatedly, I wanted to explain sword flying instead. This is great for crossing massive gaps, especially in jumping puzzles, and if used correctly, you can use it to skip entire mechanics. The requirements for this movement tech are catapult lift and the exotic boots lion ramparts. Put as simply as possible, you briefly activate and then deactivate your thruster to gain a burst of height, and then use your sword to keep you at that height while your catapult lift recharges. And then you repeat the process again and again. The timing is extremely important. If you are too slow, you will just start to drop, and if you go too fast, you will run out of thruster. Think of your thruster like a battery. There is only so long that you can have your thruster active before it runs out and you need to recharge. By turning it on and off constantly in mid-air, you give it time to recharge just enough so that you can fly forever. If you go too fast, the thruster eventually runs out of battery because it didn't recharge, so there is a perfect balance between too fast and too slow. When you get confident with the timing of sword flying, you can introduce eager edge to travel even further. As I said earlier, if you swap weapons mid-sword swing with eager edge active, you will keep your momentum and this will let your sword fly further. However, I wouldn't worry about trying to do this until you're confident with sword flying, as trying to juggle too many things at first will get you frustrated, so just take it easy. And finally, I wanted to talk about Icarus Dashing. You might have seen this more in PvP, where warlocks have just bolted ahead of you with Icarus Dash, but when you try it, you end up going slower. This is because there's actually a timing to when you should Icarus Dash to gain bonus speed. In order to go fast, you need to activate Burst Glide just before you Icarus Dash. If you don't activate Burst Glide, or you glide after the Icarus Dash, you won't get a speed boost. This one might take a little bit of practice as well, since the timing is fairly precise. If you get the timing wrong, you get slowed, but it's one of the easier things to practice because you can do it in strikes, solo ops, Crucible, or whatever content you're playing. Some extra side notes that didn't feel like they fit into the overall flow of the video, but are still things that I wanted to mention. Going back to rocket jumping, warlocks. If you have heat rises active, when you start a rocket jump, you will go insanely high into the air. A lot of speedrunners do this to get out of bounds, but for you and I, we can use this to either skip some jumping puzzles or get into a better position in order to eager edge. Titans, you can use the rocket jump to give yourself a little bit of extra height to start the sword flying with lion rampants in the first place. And that wraps up everything that I wanted to refresh or teach today. As I mentioned at the start, if my explanation didn't make sense to you, or you think that you have a better way of explaining something that I tried to, please leave a comment below so that other people can learn from you too. Anyways, I won't hold you up any longer, so please have a great rest of your day. Peace out, Girl Scout.